Hello and welcome to the Overlanding podcast, a podcast dedicated to vehicle-dependent travel. I'm your host, Andy Smith. Throughout the series, I'll be chatting with adventurous people who have chosen to travel the world by bicycle, motorcycle, car and truck. The aim of the podcast is to discover what motivates people to embark on life-changing journeys and to hear some incredible stories along the way. Joining me around the campfire this week is Jacqui Furneaux. On her 50th birthday, Jacqui purchased a 500cc Enfield Bullet in India and set off on a 7-year adventure that took her through countless countries. It's one wild ride that is certainly going to leave you awestruck. So without further ado, let's get started. Joining me today around the virtual campfire is Jacqui Furneaux. Have I pronounced your surname correctly?
Well, yes, you've done it very well, thank you.
Perfect. Hi, Jacqui.
Hello,
Hi.
Good morning.
I first came across your story a little while ago in a Sunday Times article in a magazine. And actually, my mother-in-law had saved it for me because we were actually away on our overland trip. And when we returned, she had a big pile of newspaper cuttings and articles and things that we might be interested in, and I had a read through it, and then I had obviously dig deeper and found your website, and I came across your story and was absolutely fascinated. I thought it was incredibly inspirational. So if you could just tell us kind of what you've done and when you did it, just kind of briefly, that would be really great.
Okay, well, let me point out from the onset that it was all a complete accident, and that if I'd been told even 5 years previously what was going to happen to me, I wouldn't have believed it. But I'd been backpacking for a year in Asia in the year 1998, and I'd met a Dutchman whilst I was travelling, and he was riding an Enfield, and to cut a long story short, we ended up spending some time together, and then went our separate ways, and he came to find me in England when I came back from my backpacking trip and said, why don't you buy one as well? And so off we went to India. I bought my my Bullet, 500cc Bullet, for my 50th birthday in Chennai, thinking the whole thing might last a few months, and ended up travelling around the world on my Enfield for about 7 years, which was as much a surprise to me as it was to other people, I think. Yeah, I had a wonderful time, and I still laugh about it because it was a complete accident. I never planned this. I go to meetings like the Horizons Unlimited meetings and the Overland event in England, and I think all these people that spent years planning and poring over maps and saving money and planning everything down to the last nuts and bolts, and I just went on a whim. Yeah. And it just happened to me, really. I'm very lucky indeed.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Most of the people I speak to actually, there's a certain lack of preparation in everything that we kind of do as overlanders, and well, most of us. I have spoken to some people who are meticulous planners, but do you think that if you had kind of over-planned it or spent that much time researching the world, do you think it may have put you off going to some degree, maybe?
No. No, because I by this time had fallen completely for Hendrikus, and whatever he was going to do, I wanted to do as well. And but the only preparation I had was he said, well, make sure you bring traveller's checks to the value of the bike, which will be about £1,000, and you need evidence from your bike. That's about the only preparation I had. And he said, we'll get everything when you're there, because everything's cheaper in India than it is here. So I just went with a backpack with some clothes in, and these traveller's checks with evidence from my bank that they were mine and I hadn't stolen them, and that was it. So preparation, no, absolutely none.
Yeah, And were you particularly looking for adventure, or was it a case of, oh, this just seems like an option, what I can do at this point in my life, I'm going to go for it? Or were you specifically really looking for adventure? Because you had been backpacking prior to that, right? For like...
Yes. Oh, I was away a year.
Yeah.
And, well, yes, I was looking for adventure. And it never occurred to me whilst I was backpacking to combine my love of motorbikes with my love of travel. And it wasn't until I met Hendrikus in a restaurant in Rajasthan that I thought, what a great idea. And of course, he lured me with all these wonderful stories he'd had from his previous travels. He'd been on the road for about 3 months, I think, by the time we met. And I thought, oh, gosh, that sounds great. That's what I want to do. So, off we went. And a good time was had.
Yeah. And did kind of throwing a motorbike into the mix, did that enrich your travel experience then? Were you able to get to kind of more remote places than you had been previously as a kind of backpacker?
Yes, most definitely. We went on little back roads in India into the agricultural places in some of the states we went through, and saw things that you could have gone by bus because the transport system in India is excellent, but it wouldn't have been so easy to find places to stay because there were very few hotels, but we just slept beside the bikes wherever we were and had all our equipment with us, like a petrol stove, and we did have a tent, but we didn't have to use it all the time.
Yeah.
So yes, it did open up India and everywhere else we went as a result, more than backpacking had. But I loved my year backpacking, and it's two completely different ways of travelling. You meet more people when you're backpacking, whereas we just had each other, which was actually all I wanted then.
Yeah. And now, having experienced overland travel, would you consider another backpacking trip, or did it kind of revolutionise your outlook on travel?
Oh no, I've been on other trips where I've just taken off with a bag. Yes, I went to Bulgaria with a bag, and went my bus and train all over Bulgaria. No, I love backpacking, and it's actually I find it a lot harder than travelling on a motorbike because you've got all your stuff on your back.
Yeah.
So everything you take, you've got to carry. Whereas with an Enfield, it's you can just keep adding things on it, tie bags on, and until you can hardly see the bike. But with backpacking, you have to be a lot more careful, and you have to find out the times of buses and trains, and hitch sometimes, which can be fun. But no, riding a motorbike I found was easier, don't you?
Yeah, well, we travel by a 4x4, so we're in a car, so we have a slightly more luxury than on a motorcycle. So, but yeah, we've kind of got to the point now where it's the only way we like to travel. It just offers us the ability to get into the kind of areas of the country that we really want to visit. So up in the mountains and out in the deserts. And
where have you been? Which countries?
We've been all up through Scandinavia, across Russia, Mongolia, all through Central Asia, India, Southeast Asia, and then back, and then some of North Africa as well. So 2.5 years on the road. So not quite the 7 that you've got in the bag there with this particular trip.
Yes, but don't you find it becomes a way of life, and it's there's no structure to it, or did you have a structure?
No, the freedom and being your own boss is something that really appeals to us, and that's certainly something I found out that it's something that it kind of affected you, because in the previous podcast interview that I listened to with yourself on I can't remember, Adventure Bike Radio I think it is called, it was something that you mentioned, that when you returned back to Bristol, you found it very difficult to kind of reintegrate, or not reintegrate, but just to get back to that normal routine, whereas previously you'd been your own boss, you decided where you wanted to go, you didn't have the regular 9 to 5, and you're very much in charge of your own destiny. and that's something I really liked about your trip, and I like the fact that you were on a motorbike, and a motorcycle is very synonymous with freedom and that kind of, just a turn of the throttle and away you go down the road, and anything is possible. And when you're on the bike, kind of nothing matters. And I can't remember, I heard a really good interview with someone just recently, I can't remember where it was, and they were talking about riding a motorbike, and when you're riding a motorbike, you're very much in the moment, because if you're not concentrating fully on what you're doing, there's a good chance you're going to die. And so all that matters in that particular moment when you are riding the motorbike is riding the motorbike. Obviously there are long stretches of straight road where you can kind of just sit back and relax.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
kind of lose yourself. But
I found that in Australia, where the roads were long and straight, and I wasn't wearing a helmet for a lot of the time, and you can. I did go into some place that was it was a very strange experience, because I would spend a whole day travelling to avoid the flies. I knew that if I stopped, I'd be covered in flies within minutes. So I just kept going all day, and on the Enfield obviously didn't go hugely fast or far because of the road corrugations. And something happened to me mentally, and it was like I relived my childhood and my earlier years. It just came flooding back, completely unbidden. And I wrote a lot in my diary during those days about all the things I'd been thinking about during those hours during the day, and it made quite interesting reading, because I visited places I hadn't visited in my head for many years, and I had quite a few revelations about things. So yes, that was quite interesting. But you're right. When you're riding a motorbike, your ears and eyes are in focus. You're really tuned in most of the time.
Yeah.
To what's, and you notice immediately if there's a different sound, or if the bike's behaving differently. Yeah, I got very tuned into that, which was almost like a meditation in itself.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating, actually, and it's funny, because when I kind of set up the podcast, I was like, yes, it's about overland travel, but the actual physicality of travelling is one aspect of it, but then there's the whole mental journey that people go on when they go on these kind of trips, which actually has turned out to be, for me personally, I hope our listeners find it equally as enjoyable, but the mental journeys that people go on these kind of long overland trips is incredibly fascinating. And like then when you just said you kind of had a revelation almost, and then you were kind of regressed back to childhood and you were remembering things from your childhood. That's incredibly fascinating. And like just now I'm kind of thinking about it and thinking, when you are riding a motorbike or driving a car on a very long stretch of road that's straight, it can be incredibly mesmerising, because you've got things whizzing past in your peripheral vision, whereas your kind of distant vision, the scene doesn't really change much if it's a very long straight road through a desert, and it can be really quite mesmerising. And you do, and especially on a motorbike, I think, and we've had this a lot with a lot of the cyclists I've also spoken to, where it becomes very introspective, and the journey is not just about experiencing new cultures and new countries, it's about how you travel in your own mind and where you go, and kind of how you develop as a person, which I find very interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it was a bit of a surprise. Yeah.
So, in India, you obviously bought an Indian motorcycle, incredible machines, and a motorcycle which is completely ingrained in Indian culture and synonymous with India, really. When you purchased it, were you expecting to then take the motorcycle outside of India, or did you not really have a plan?
No, there wasn't a plan. Henriques had got some sort of vague idea of doing motorcycle tours in Pakistan, but at the time, it wasn't the best time because, as you're probably aware, there's always trouble between India and Pakistan, and we didn't get any responses when we put lots of flyers out or he built a website. So we abandoned that idea and just carried on travelling. And he didn't get fed up with me after 6 months, which is what I thought might happen. I imagined when I bought this motorbike that being so much younger than me, he would soon tire of me and would want to travel on his own, and then I would sell the bike or just leave the bike in India and come home and try and be a normal person again. But it didn't work out like that. And we travelled together for 4 years, which did mean crossing some borders. The first one was into Nepal, and then back into India, and then we went into Pakistan.
Yeah. And at this kind of point in your life, had you travelled much to kind of developing countries prior to this, or was your first backpacking experience where you went away for that year, was that your first experience of travel outside of Europe? Or
yes, it was. Although when I was married, my husband was quite adventurous, and we would take off to go camping in France, which in the 70s is quite unusual to do that sort of thing. And we had 2 small children. We'd just pack up the old Renault 4 with the camping equipment, and off we'd go to France and do pretty much like I was doing. We'd turn up somewhere, find a campsite, and that's where we'd be. But no, I hadn't been outside Europe apart from a couple of trips to America. I hadn't been to Asia before, so wow, that was quite a surprise.
Yeah.
But I loved it immediately.
Yeah, and kind of experiencing those kind of new cultures can be incredibly eye-opening. Did you have any kind of preconceptions about those countries before you arrived, and did those countries meet your preconceptions, or did they blow them out of the water? How were you on that first backpacking trip?
Absolutely terrified. I booked the trip, and then I didn't do much in the way of research. I didn't have time for one thing because it all happened in rather a hurry, and so I just booked the trip and knew I was going to Thailand, and I knew I had the option of coming home if I didn't like anything, because I had a career break. I was awarded a career break, which meant that I could have some sort of job with the health authority I was working for. It was an unpaid break, but it was sort of had a safety net attached to it that if all went wrong, I could come back. But preconceived ideas about Asia, no, not really. No, none at all. I had no idea what I was going to expect, and I quite like that. I hardly ever research where I'm going very much, because I knew I had a year at maximum, and I thought, well, I can't research absolutely everything. I'll just go and see. That's how I do things, really. I just go and see what it's like, and if I don't like it, I move on, and if I do like it, I stay. That's pretty much how I travelled.
Yeah.
So no preconceived ideas, really.
Yeah.
I even going to Laos, I'd never even heard of Laos. So I found myself in Laos with my Swiss friend, and that was quite a surprise too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no idea what was going to happen after the first 3 days.
Yeah, Laos is an incredible country. Just talking to you now, it seems one thing that's really quite apparent about the way you travel is that you kind of very easy and go with the flow, or you don't have these kind of plans. Was that a kind of personality trait that you had before you went travelling, or has that developed through travelling?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I've always been like that, but I've been structured by life and society, and there are certain expectations when you're a wife and mother and a nurse that you don't go off and do your own thing. No, I think I was quite good at being structured, but when I was let loose, I think, oh wow, this is really nice. And it's funny you should say about going with the flow, because my family laughs at me about that, by going with the flow. Yes, it's become a bit of a family joke.
Yeah.
So, but I absolutely did love the aimlessness of the whole thing. Where shall I go today? Let's look at the map. Oh, that's a funny name. I'll go there. There was a place in India called Siliguri, and
yeah.
Henricus and I said, "Oh, let's go there. It sounds like silly girly." So off we went there, and ended up in Darjeeling and Nepal. So yes, I like that sort of randomness of the whole thing.
Yeah, they do say that India is very much like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. And actually, having travelled through there myself, we spent 4.5 months in India. It is an incredible country. There's no place like it, really.
No.
And you can expect to see absolutely anything and everything from the road.
Yes.
Yes. And how did you find being in India for such a long period of time? Did it? Because I know a lot of people who travel there kind of get worn out by it. The novelty wears off after a little while. How did you find being there?
I like your Marmite analogy. I would say, I would go even further and say that one day you like Marmite, the next day you hate it, and then you like it the next day.
Yeah.
Because that's how India is. You think, oh, I hate this place. Why am I here? It's so filthy and rubbish everywhere, and people, you can't get away from people. I'm leaving, I'm going. And then the next day you think something lovely happens. You think, wow, what a place this is. And that's what I love, is that variety in those. It really shakes your emotions up. And we were there a long time. I spent a long time there when I was backpacking, and then Henricus and I spent a long time there when we were on our motorbikes, and hating it one day, loving it the next. But no, I have a great fondness for Mother India.
Yeah. And my wife is the exact same. Actually, she loves it, and she's I think she's been maybe 5 or 6 times now, and on quite long trips as well. She was there for a year teaching once, and then we spent 4.5 months this time travelling through, and other times she's been for a couple of months at a time. So she absolutely loves it. And when we travelled through last year, it's my first ever visit to India. And she was a bit apprehensive because she wasn't sure how I was going to react to it. It's just insane. The things you will see from the road are just incredible. With the bikes, did you venture? I know you kind of headed up into the mountains at some point. Did you venture up into the mountains and manage to get to the remote places in India?
Well, we had planned to. We went all over India. Having bought the bike in Chennai, we then headed north into the mountains. We had quite an experience in the mountains. Actually, Henricus had an idea that he'd like to go from the road to Leh, which is, I understand, the second highest road in the world.
Yeah.
And he'd like to do that, but unfortunately, at the time, we had his friend with us, and he was riding pillion on the back of Henricus's bike, and I was carrying all the luggage. But unfortunately, poor Theo, as I call him in the book, he wouldn't eat. He didn't like Indian food. He didn't drink anything except carbonated drinks, and he became quite ill. And I could see him nearly falling off the back of Henricus's bike on our way to Leh. We were in Kashmir, and so we had to stop. And unfortunately, we stopped fortunately at the time, we stopped at a festival that was there to celebrate a Hindu festival. There was a cave where there was an icicle formed every year that was a very religious symbol for Hindus who gathered there in their thousands. And the army medical team was there to help poor Theo, and they put drips in his arms and injections in his bottom, and he was whisked off to a tent. It was like something out of MASH, and so we never did get to Leh, but we did do a lot of interesting routes in Kashmir and up in the mountains in India. We went to Sikkim. That was lovely. That's where we that's where we started, really. Sort of the mountainous part of things.
Yeah. I saw a great photograph of you with your bike and a big group of soldiers up in Kashmir.
That's right. That's that event.
And and that kind of, and the photograph is really kind of stereotypical of India, and I kind of know what it's like, because as soon as you stop, you kind of attract a big group of people who just kind of stand round and stare.
Yes, but they were all engineers, and I had a leak.
So they're very interested. Okay.
And what they did, they fixed it for me. They were marvellous mechanics, absolutely wonderful, top notch. And what had happened was that the gasket in the O-ring in the clutch case had worn, and they just padded it out with hairy garden string to pad it out, and it worked for months until I was able to get a new one.
Yeah.
So yes, as you say, typical India. Fix it with something that you can find, something that's at hand will mend an Enfield particularly.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you had to have any repairs done to your vehicle, but
yeah, lots.
Did you?
Yeah, well, not a few. But it's to be expected, because we did cover quite a lot of miles in total. But the kind of ingenuity, basically anywhere outside of Europe, people have a tendency to fix things rather than to kind of throw them away, which is what happens in the Western world. And you see the ingenuity in how people work is incredible, and a willingness to pull things apart, which I think in the West we're quite scared to do because we don't understand it. And I think people have much better mechanical knowledge. For example, in Russia we saw countless times when a larder would be stopped at the side of the road, and on one occasion we saw the guy had his entire gearbox out, and he was just fixing his entire gearbox at the side of the road on his own, just happily getting on with it. And you just couldn't imagine that, could you?
There's no AA in places like
exactly.
that, is there?
So that kind of ingenuity, it's interesting the things you learn while you're travelling, and quite often you think, if only the Western world would adapt those kind of skills or that mindset.
Yes, I worry actually, because we just, as you say, we just throw things away and order a new one, and we can't carry on like that, can we? It's just not sustainable.
No, and and that is just one of the most important kind of lessons I've learned, I think, from travelling is just it makes you see the ridiculousness in Western culture and the way we live. Sometimes it kind of highlights it really quite clearly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so from India, where did you travel to next? Down through Southeast Asia?
Let me think. What did we do? Oh yes, we wanted to. Yes, Hendrikus had the idea that he would like to settle down and do some proper work in New Zealand. He of course had to earn money as he went, and he was very, very proficient at making websites, which at that time you couldn't just sort of make your own as easily as you can now. So he would approach a business, or a business would approach him and say, build us a website, please. And so he could do that whilst we were on the road, going from internet cafe to internet cafe, and he did really well. And so we started making our way towards New Zealand, which meant going down through Southeast Asia and then hopping across to Australia and then to New Zealand. So that's what we thought we'd do. And I thought, that's a great idea. Yeah, I'll do that. So we made our way from India. We couldn't ride through Burma, Myanmar. So we shipped the bikes around India to Bangkok. That would take about 3 weeks. So whilst we were waiting for them to get there, we decided we'd fly into Burma and have a look round. So we did a bit of backpacking there. And yes, that was most interesting. It was the rainy season, and we went to a lot of places by boat. Then we met the bikes in Bangkok, and just carried on again, and spent some time going around Cambodia, and then into Malaysia, where we split up. And he carried on. He flew himself and his bike to Australia, and we weren't getting on very well then, and I thought it was probably best if we go our separate ways. Although I was really apprehensive about managing the bike on my own, I thought I'd have a bash, and I carried on through Indonesia. But I made the mistake of going by boat. I got friendly with a skipper who had a catamaran, who said he would take me and the boat and the bike to Australia as he was going. So that's what we did. I put the bike on his catamaran and had the most terrifying experience of the entire trip. Well, one of the two most terrifying experiences of the whole trip.
Okay. Is that something you want to talk about, or?
Well, yes. It was terrifying. The bike just fitted into the transom of this. It was only, I think it was about 23 feet. This catamaran, and it was an aluminium one. And I didn't know much about sailing. My brother and I had a small boat in Western-super-Mare, and that was the extent of my sailing knowledge. So it wasn't what I expected. I'm a bit of a romantic, and I had this wonderful vision of floating past Indonesian islands on the way to Australia, and it would all be lovely. But unfortunately, the skipper and I didn't get on, and I ended up sleeping with a knife under my pillow because he said he'd cut me into little bits and throw me overboard. And we had lots of storms in the Straits of Malacca, and then some pirates came along. Oh yes, and we picked up some castaways that had been trying to get from Indonesia to Malaysia, and had been picked up by some fishermen who they had been promised by some fishermen to take them, but they'd just thrown them overboard and taken their money and left them there. So of course we picked them up and took them to Malaysia with the intention of reporting the incident to the Malaysian police, but we got rather fond of them on the way and didn't. So yes, so that's, I don't know, probably I'll be locked up for that now. However, yes, so eventually we did get to, and we were robbed along the way, which necessitated us having to call in at Jakarta because he had all his documents stolen from the boat. Somebody broke in. Fortunately, I had my passport and all my documents with me. And so as soon as we got to Jakarta, I did a runner. I got off that boat and never saw him again.
Jumped ship. It sounds like a wise move.
Oh, it was. And I had a wonderful ride through Java. Java's just lovely. I loved it. And then I got the bike on a barge to Australia from East Timor.
Okay, and throughout this time, then, if you're kind of having all these experiences, are you maintaining contact with your family back home, and how did you do that?
Email.
Okay.
Yes, I mean there was nothing like Facebook then. We're talking about 2000, and there wasn't the social media there is now.
Yeah.
So just had email and postcards.
Yeah.
And I would write as often as I could, and of course couldn't email every 5 minutes like you can now.
Yeah. And were you documenting your trip? So you mentioned before that you were keeping a diary, so how were you dealing with that?
Well, I wrote my diary nearly every day, or I would catch up if I couldn't, just to remember. So that I had an idea that maybe one day if I went blind or couldn't move, that somebody might read my diaries out to me. But so I wrote, through the 7 years, I wrote about 16 diaries, well, exactly 16 diaries, and documented most things in those.
Yeah.
So that's what I rely on now.
And how were you carrying those around with you at all time, or did you post them back, or?
As they were completed, with great trepidation, I would send them to a friend who I knew would look after them.
Yeah.
And not read them. So yes, every time I came back, because I did return to the UK, now and then, for family occasions and Christmas and things like that, special occasions.
Yeah.
So then I would collect my diaries and put them in a safe place, and so 16 altogether.
And throughout this time, your kind of daughters are obviously hearing some of these stories. How did your family feel about you kind of undertaking this kind of adventure?
Well, I've asked them this, and they've often said that they stopped worrying about me after I got through Cambodia without getting blown up in a landmine. But this was when I was backpacking. So I think most of my escapades, they found them quite unsurprising.
Yeah.
Quite a few stories there.
Yeah, and that, like, that particular story on the boat. Do you have many stories like that, or are there like certain anecdotes? Yeah, and what are some of the others that people like to hear you recall?
They like the broken leg story. People like disasters. Broke my leg in Pakistan. That turned out to be really quite a good thing that happened. I'm sure you must have found this, but if you have what is considered a disaster, you can turn it round so that it's actually quite interesting.
Yeah, that's actually a running theme within the podcast. That? Yeah, we've had that on the podcast, not only in our own personal trip, but pretty much everyone I've spoken to. There's always good things come out of a disaster, whether it's getting lost, breaking down, getting stuck, breaking something. It's generally those things that lead to interesting stories, memorable stories, and meeting amazing people.
Especially the getting lost one. I love getting lost because you always have an adventure if you get lost. So I never travel with a GPS or sat nav.
Yeah. That's really interesting. One thing I really wanted to talk to you about, and I know you've kind of been writing a book recently, and I think you've recently just put the final full stop in on your first draft, right?
Yes, I had a celebration about that.
Yeah.
Yes, I started this. I looked it up how long have I been doing it, and I started this in January 2015. And I think last Sunday I put the final full stop on the last chapter. But the last chapter will be altered probably as I read through again. And if there's any unanswered questions, I should put them in the end.
Yeah.
So nobody knows the last chapter yet. So yes.
So kind of what? Because obviously there's been quite a passing of time since you finished your trip and you started writing, and one thing I've certainly noticed in the kind of 5 years that I've really been interested in overland travel is that there seems to be a lot more interest recently in overland trips, and there seems to be more and more people undertaking them, and more websites kind of popping up, and more books coming out. Is that the reason why you wanted to write about your story now, or do you have a more personal reason, or why do you think it's important that you wanted to write this book?
That's interesting. Well, I think it started because when I first came back, to answer one of your questions, it's taken me this long really to settle down, and that's 7 years. It did take that long for me to think, wow, I'm back. But no, the first thing was I came back in the March in 2007, and in the June was my first trip to the Horizons Unlimited meeting in the UK. And these are events that take place all over the world, set up by Grant and Susan Johnson, and I heard about Horizons Unlimited and used it a couple of times whilst I was travelling on my own. And I wanted to say thank you. So somebody suggested I did a talk. So So I did a very primitive type of presentation at that event, and I met lots and lots of other people, including Ted Simon and Lois Price and lots of other people and I felt like I'd come home. It was wonderful. And of course, lots of books have been written since. And I think the thing that really kicked it off was Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman doing The Long Way Round, which I watched with absolute wonder. And I know what it's like. I know what they've been feeling. But of course, they didn't have the unlimited time I had. Yeah. And I was just free to go where I liked. So I think that's what really kicked it off, and good for them, because look at the wonderful things that are happening now and all the different magazines that are coming out. We've now got Overland magazine with stories of people who just take off and go and do wonderful trips, even if it's just getting on your motorbike and going off for the day or for a weekend. It's an adventure. It doesn't have to be 7 years or 2.5 years as you did, or even 6 months or a month. It can be your annual holiday and hiring a motorbike, and you write an article about it, and it's opening up the world to people who wouldn't dream of doing anything like this, and telling people, yeah, people are great wherever you go, because that's what I found. If I had a problem, somebody would always help. And Ted Simon's book, Jupiter's Travels, starts off with him sitting under a tree with his motorbike broken down, and he knows, he's been in India long enough to know that somebody's going to come and help, and they do. And it's the disasters, the breakdowns, the punctures, the oh no, what's happened now? Those where am I? Those are the occasions I find I've had the most fun in the end, and met the most wonderful people.
Yeah, and kind of just there, that kind of leads me on to something else I'd just been thinking about. You're talking about just meeting people, and that's something that again has been reiterated by everyone I speak to on the podcast, is that quite often our preconceptions that the world is a scary, horrible place are just not true, and everywhere you go you will meet people who are incredibly friendly and willing to help you, and like you said, when you get lost or break down, that's when people really shine and they come to your help and rescue you. One thing I had noticed, kind of looking through your Twitter feed, is that you're seemingly interested in kind of promoting feminist issues. On your trip, were you made more aware of the kind of inequalities in the world? Because obviously places like India, it's very rare that you see a woman riding a motorbike, or a lot of these countries, certainly through Central Asia and India, there are definitely really obvious equalities in the world. Is that something that kind of triggered this interest in feminist issues, or was that something that you've always felt?
No, it wasn't that. It was it's one of those things. When I was backpacking, and I was backpacking in Pakistan in particular, and I would take buses to remote areas and places where you would never see a woman. And I was in my very much bewildered days, and I thought, wow, this is really different. You don't see women about in the streets, and men would be doing all the shopping in the markets. And if you did see a woman, she was heavily covered and always with a male companion. And I didn't judge at all at that time what was happening. I didn't see it as right or wrong. It was just, well, they do things differently here. And I wouldn't be able to live the life I live in a place like this. And what would that be like if I never ventured out of my home, unless I was accompanied and covered up? And so those were my sort of thinking years, I think.
Yeah.
When I came back, that's when I started to get interested in the inequalities here, and seeing that women are judged by what they look like rather than what they can do. And I thought, that's not fair. That's not fair. And I've got two wonderful grandchildren now, and I don't want them to grow up in a world where, because one is a male and one is a female, that they have different opportunities in life. And that's really what sparked me off to join the Bristol Fawcett Society.
Yeah, because the one thing I find incredibly fascinating is the kind of tightness of the motorcycling scene globally, and it's something that kind of really I'm also very interested in how overland trips on 2 wheels compare to overland trips on 4 wheels, and one thing that's strikingly obvious in the difference is that the motorcyclists have a very tight scene, and it's something that ties them all together globally. It's just the simple fact that you have 2 wheels, and a lot of the motorcyclists I've spoken to feel incredibly welcomed worldwide. Like I spoke to one woman who had an incredible story, and she was pretty much invited from town to town by motorcyclists just through kind of social media, purely because they were interested in what she was doing. And one thing I think the motorcycle scene is really kind of blazing a trail and being very pioneering about is most of the people I've spoken to who've done long motorcycle trips so far have been women, and I think yeah, and I think outside of the motorcycling community and outside of the overlanding community, I think that may come across as a surprise to the kind of everyday person in the street, that there are so many women undertaking these kind of epic motorcycle trips. And I think it's a fantastic thing. I think, it doesn't make any difference whether you're a man or a woman. You can ride a motorbike.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yes, Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. I was kind of, to be honest, I didn't know where I was really going with that with that next ramble.
As you were speaking, I was reminded of 2 instances where being a woman on a motorbike I think I have raised eyebrows, to say the least, especially at the time when I was doing it. On one occasion, I was in Pakistan, and it was the Silk Route Festival. It was way up in the mountains in Gilgit, and they have this event called the Silk Route Festival. And there was one day when it was just open for women, and I went on that day, and I got chatting to lots of women about why was there a need for a day just for women, and it was so that they could be more free to have a look at things. And they said to me, what on earth makes you, as a woman, want to ride a motorbike? Aren't you happy at home with your husband and children and families? And, they thought I was odd, and I thought, how odd that you should have this event that women feel that they can only relax if they're not with men, to stop and talk to me, because this didn't happen normally in Pakistan. Women were wary about approaching me because most of them were accompanied by men anyway. But at this event, they were free to talk to me, and they said, "We think you're odd. Why aren't you happy?" And I said, "Well, I think you're odd. That you don't think it's and that sounds wrong. We each thought the other was a bit strange." And another event was in Colombia, and Colombia. And I was riding along, and I stopped to have some yogurt at a farmhouse, and a young woman came out, and she looked at the motorbike, and she looked at me, and she was absolutely smitten. And I would love to know now if she ever did do what she said she was going to do, which was to get her own motorbike and travel around on it, because she'd never seen anything like a woman on a motorbike in Colombia, whereas they do ride motorbikes now. I have friends there now who ride motorbikes, but she hadn't seen anything like that, and I think she was quite inspired and wanted to do the same thing. So I'd love to think that she did do it. But you're right. I didn't know that there were more long-term women motorcycle riders than adventure motorcycle riders than men.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important about the kind of trips that we undertake are these cultural exchanges. Like then you were talking about Pakistan, and in the West and being British, we're incredibly lucky that we have a passport that allows us to travel to so many countries, whereas the people in Pakistan don't have that luxury of, well, firstly a passport that allows them to travel, and secondly the money to travel. So that's why I think these kind of cultural exchanges are incredibly important, and that's why I think when you visit these countries, it's the essence of what you do should be doing your best to engage with the local people as much as possible. Because like then, for example, you're learning something about their culture and they're learning something about our culture, and as much as it may be dumbfounding or bewildering at times, certainly for them, to see a woman riding a motorbike, why isn't she happy in the home? It's just, that kind of phrase you just couldn't imagine in the Western world. And those kind of freedoms make you really aware of kind of the countries you visit. I think it's fascinating. And just before you mentioned Lois Price, I think Lois has recently just finished her book. I think it's coming out in the new year, which documents her time travelling around Iran on a motorbike.
Yeah.
And Iran is another country where the people in Iran are incredible, amazing, but their kind of attitude towards women and what they can and can't do is something that can be really quite shocking if you're not aware of their culture. So I think for Lois to travel on a motorbike and kind of report on her experiences in that country, I think will be an incredible read. I think it'll be a fascinating book.
Absolutely, yes.
So to go back to your book then, when you kind of went through the process of writing your book for the last 2 years or so, how's that been? Has that been a journey? Have you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it made me think a lot about what I'd seen, and my comments as I was travelling. I'd asked questions then that I still have no answers to. Yes, it was. For me, it's been a joyous experience. I know a lot of writers find it hard work, but it's been really good for me because I'm a bit of aimlessness is my name, and so it has given me an aim, and I have worked hard at it, and I've finished it now. Well, no, I haven't. I'm reading through the second. I'm doing the second draft now and trying to cut out some of the less interesting things. But Paddy Tyson, who's the editor of Overland magazine, he's helping me. He's my mentor through Jupiter's Travellers, and he's hopefully going to lick it into shape and go through with a red pen and cut out some of the less interesting stories. Because, I mean, you'll know this. Every day something happens to make you laugh or to make you wonder about things, or things you want to tell people about. And that's really why I've written this all down, is because I want to tell people what it was like. And I find I think people just don't understand what we're talking about, is that it really does open your eyes. And I find now, even I live in Bristol, I love this city, and there's something going on all the time here, and I think, I'm wondering if I would have noticed that if I hadn't been travelling all those years and noticing things. It's really made me notice things, little things that are happening right under my nose here, and so, I'll walk a different way to somewhere, or I'll ride my bike to a different place, and I'll always see something that is interesting, and that if I was a newcomer here, I would have noticed that perhaps people don't even see it. So it's taught me to see, and reading my diaries again to write my book has made me realise that that's what was happening to me as I was going along.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because actually that's totally reminded me where I heard the motorcycle quote I was talking about earlier, when I heard an interview where someone was talking about riding the motorbike and being focused in the moment. And what you've just said actually reminded me where I heard it. It was from, I was watching a documentary about John Berger, who was an art critic and thinker, and he wrote an incredibly famous book in the 70s, I think it was written, called The Art of Looking, which is a fascinating book. And it's my background is through the creative arts, and it's always on reading lists at art universities. It's like an essential book that every young artist or designer should read, and it essentially talks about how you look at the world around you and how you interpret it and putting things into context. And I think what you've just talked about is a great example of how that can benefit your life. Admittedly, you kind of got to the same outcome as what he talks about in the book, but you've kind of got to it through a different route, which has been through travelling and looking at the world around you. Which is really interesting, and I think everyone would benefit from that. And I think travelling is certainly a great way to put yourself into that position where you reevaluate the world around you and look at it and start to question. And whether that's through experiencing conflict or gender issues or religious issues in all the countries that you visit, it kind of demands you to ask questions about the things you're experiencing, which helps you then understand the world, which of course is a beneficial to everyone, because then you're removing the barriers between people, which is something kind of, well, with our recent UK political climate and what's happening in the US, there seems to be a big division between people in our own countries currently, and for people like us, I think that must be quite hard to deal with, because we've seen the world, and you kind of know that everyone in the world is in the same position, and ultimately we're all the same. We're just people trying to get on with our lives, and these divisions kind of don't help. That seems like a poignant place to end, but I've still got more questions to ask you about your book.
Well, I've got something I want to say. It works the other way. Having been looked after and put up and accommodated by so many wonderful people all over the world, I try to do my best to redress the balance by having people to come and stay with me, as I'm still in touch with quite a lot of people that I met. And recently, this year, I've got a French friend who also is a woman motorcycle traveller, Catherine Girignac, and she came to stay with me in the summer. And we were walking around the harbour here in Bristol, and there were some Morris men dancing, and she'd never seen Morris men. And so, that was another example of just what we've got under our noses. And I wouldn't have walked past without noticing, obviously you can't, but that was a travel adventure for her. She was thrilled to bits. And, it's wonderful to be able to redress the balance and show people our culture as well, things that we take for granted. Yeah. And we are all the same, I agree with you. We are all the same. We're just trying to get on with our lives. And there are some people who just want to stop us doing that, it seems.
Yeah, that's very true. So just to go back to your book just very, very quickly. Yeah. So it was clearly a fun experience, kind of reminiscing and going through all those experiences that you encountered on your travels. Has that to some degree kind of reunited your wanderlust for the world, or?
Yes, I would. Well, in effect, I've been doing it all again these last 2 years. What I've been writing about it, I've been reliving the experience, but talking to you, and you've been to places I've never been travelling in. Makes me wonder what it's like there. So who knows? I still have the bike. It lives with me here in Bristol. So
yeah,
who knows? I'll ask it what it thinks.
Does your bike have a name?
No, isn't it shocking? It hasn't. It's terrible. By the time I decided what gender it was too late, and it hasn't got a gender. It's just the bike.
The bike.
Isn't that oh my goodness! It's got one big personality then.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting aspect to the kind of people who undertake these trips. Like our car has a name, and whenever I speak to people, I don't know. Sometimes I ask them whether their vehicle has a name, and other times I've asked the question and the person has just looked at me like I'm absolutely insane. Are you ridiculous? Why would it have a name? It's just a machine. They generally tend to be Germans, though.
No, it's not just a machine. Yeah. My goodness me, no.
It's very funny. Okay, and your book has a cracking title, which I really liked. Is that something you want to reveal now, or is it too early? Yeah,
absolutely. After a great deal of thought and family discussion, it's something that came to me one day. My name's Jacqui. I was on the road, so it's called Hit the Road, Jack.
Yeah, I think that's perfect title. Absolutely amazing. And your book, is how long before you think it's going to hit the shelves?
I have no idea. Paddy's still going through it at the moment.
Yeah.
He's doing some editing and some proofreading. Actually, I don't know what is the difference between editing and proofreading. I must find out. But anyway, he's doing that at the moment, and then I suppose we'll talk about what to do next.
Yeah.
I've got to decide a cover as well, what to put on the cover. And I'm having help with that with Simon Roberts, who also is a motorcycle traveller, who is an artist. So yes, trying to do the cover at the moment. I don't know how long do these things take. I've no idea. I've done this before.
And one thing you mentioned just before was you mentioned Jupiter's Travellers, and just because I'm aware that quite a lot of our listeners may come from a 4x4 background, so they might not have the same reference points when I speak to motorcyclists. But Jupiter's Travellers is part of the Ted Simon Foundation, right? And that's in place to help people promote their stories. And has that been a great help to you?
Oh, absolutely, yes. The inspiration it's what got me kicked off. Actually, I have to thank Jupiter's Travels for that, especially Ian Harper, who sort of gave me a big nudge to get on with it.
Yeah, because I think the way it operates, I'm not entirely sure here, so you may have to correct this, but they basically facilitate you to get your story out to a wider audience, right? So they quite often have offer peer help and basically a facility. Yeah.
Yes. There's no financial help at all, but it's just having a mentor there that will encourage you. There's filmmakers, writers, all sorts of things, and it's the ethos of the organisation is to do what we've been talking about, is to get people out there telling people what it's like, and not to be scared or fearful of people that live in that country over there, and they're just like us. And that's the whole ethos, is to try and bring us all together and stop us being fearful of each other.
Yeah. Okay, I think that is a perfect place to end, because it's a nice positive note. It's something that's something that we're both clearly quite passionate about, and I think that's a nice place to finish. And I'm aware that we're approaching the hour.
Okay.
Jacqui, thank you very much for your time. I've absolutely
lovely sitting around a campfire with you.
It is, and to be honest, in these kind of English winters, we need to sit around the campfire more often. Thank you very much for your time. Once again, the podcast has proved that life's too short. Planning is overrated, and that the finest quality any overlander could have is willingness. Jacqui's story embraces change at every junction, and it is this kind of eagerness to immerse herself into each new chapter that has led to some of the amazing stories you've heard today. Being fairly modest, I'm sure she'd probably disagree with me, but I think it was incredibly daring of Jacqui to do what she did, and as a result she experienced what the world had to offer, and unsurprisingly it was mostly good. If you like the show, please subscribe on iTunes and write us a review. We love to engage with our listeners, so please find us on Facebook /The Overlanding Podcast. You can also find us on Twitter at Overlanding Podcast. We are also Overland Tribe leaders on the new social media platform just for motor enthusiasts, Drive Tribe. Sign up, search Overlanding Podcast and join our tribe for unique content. Please share, like, bump and give us a thumbs up all over our social media channels. We are still searching for people who undertook overland trips in the 60s, 70s and 80s. If you're an overlander yourself and have an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you too. Email us at aroundtheworldin800days@mail.com. You can also get in touch with us via our website, theoverlandingpodcast.com. Okay, many thanks for listening and joining us around the virtual campfire. That's it for this week. Goodbye.